Strangers Inside, Detective Dev crime thriller series. Written by Clive Dev. Narrated by Allison Hart. London City is looking very beautiful in the sunshine. It was a mild, sunny day in autumn. The giant wheel in the far distance is rotating with the wind. It is a symbol of majesty, reflecting the richness of London's modern architecture, a continuation from the old to the new. The River Thames is catching the reflection of the buildings, both old and the not-so-old, that are nestled on its banks. Amongst this affluence is Clive's Poker Club, a gaming center and casino of international repute. It is a massive 2-story building in the middle of the city with its own private car park. It is one of the well-known highlights of the city. Tourists always have this location marked on their travel itinerary. The bar is a large space at the back wall. It was always busy, and the bartenders worked for every penny they deserved. Yet, they all looked very happy. They never smiled through clenched teeth as most people in customer service do. Their smile actually reached their eyes. Although many of the bar attendants were females, there was no lewdness in this place. There was quite a number of people in the bar. If you sat on the bar stool, you could see all the poker machines and the eager hands and the tense, or not so tense, bodies. Wait! Someone has just won a jackpot. You can hear the cheer go up from the far corner of the hall. Wow, this seems to be his lucky day. The man beside him is looking at him in envy. Maybe he is new to this place, or probably a tourist, and does not know that he will win eventually. The man who won the jackpot collected his prize money and left. Someone else is taking his place at the same machine. He is standing looking at the machine. Tension is visible all over his body. Looks like he is an Indian. Well, that is strange. Indians usually don't visit gambling dens in foreign countries. They are very careful with their money. The sense of community in India is very strong, and people go abroad to work so that they can earn enough money and then go back home. Most, not all, of the tech guys work only for 3 or 4 months at a time and then go back to their own country. They may do another stint in a couple of years. Money is never enough, is it? Oh, look! He won a jackpot straight away. Well, he doesn't seem to be celebrating. Wonder what is wrong? What is going through his head? Chinu was in another world completely. He was oblivious to the amount of money that he had won just now. He continued to play. The noises coming from all the other machines were soothing him as well. It is like a sweet melody to his ears. He won a small jackpot again, and slowly he was becoming aware of his win. But his face was screwed in bitterness. This was not a timely win. A little bit too late. Had he even won a fraction of this a few days ago, he would not be in the situation he was in now. He hoped that he did not have to face the consequences for his actions. He smiles to himself bitterly. That is fooling himself, he thinks. Everyone has to pay for their actions, good or bad. Karma was inescapable. As his dad always said, one who eats salt has to drink water. Hope it is not soon, though. Hope he is able to escape. He is not happy with what he has done, and yet he feels no remorse. The winning from the machine was making him more feverish and irritated. Suddenly, Chinu became very alert. Realization dawned on him slowly that his machine was the only one making all the noise. None of the other machines were being operated. The only noise coming from those machines was the usual music of inactivity. Something was not quite right. He turned his head slightly. The other machines were vacant. The people who were using those slots were not there anymore. That is not the usual pattern for this place. Suddenly, a shiver ran down his spine. He began to perspire. He needed to get out. He was suffocating in here. The oxygen coming through the pipes was not enough anymore. A voice which conveyed authority and intent came from behind him.
"This is the police. Kneel down on the floor with your hands behind you and don't turn around."
Chinu hesitated. He tried to reach his back pocket, but one of the officers shot him in the leg. Detective Dev, who was heading the team of officers, had come to arrest Chinu on the suspicion of a dreadful crime. Chinu fell to the floor, howling in pain, and he rubbed his blood-soaked knee. Officer Dev appeared within his line of vision. Dev still had his gun pointed at Chinu and was anticipating his next move. A few gasps came from the crowd behind him. 2 deputies turned around to calm the people at the back. They looked at them and signaled them to keep quiet. Detective Dev spoke to Chinu.
"Chinu, put your hands behind your back. You have no way to escape."
Chinu slowly placed his hand behind his back. Brenda, who was Dev's assistant, came forward and handcuffed Chinu. Chinu was assisted to get up by one of the deputies. He had moved forward to assist Brenda. Chinu again cried out in pain. He was now turned away from the wall and facing the room. He realized that the punters have all gone. Only the casino staff were the witness to the scene, and they looked horrified. 2 deputies assisted him to walk out through the back door. Detective Dev followed their progress with his eyes all the way to the door. He then turned around to the people and addressed them.
"Sorry for all the commotion, folks. It is fine now, and you can continue with your work. Thank you for your cooperation."
He then walked out with his assistant. Chinu, on walking out with the assistants, was blinded by the sudden light outside. He gasped when he saw the campus surrounded by the police with their flashlights turned on. The police were just a silhouette in the darkness beyond the perimeter of light. The rest of the world was pitched in black. Winter in the northern hemisphere, darker evenings and darker mornings. It added to a person's sense of desperation. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the bright light. He now knew that he could not have escaped this lot, even if he were able to get out to the door. He was only an ordinary man, not an athlete, gangster, or a member of the mafia. The place was crawling with the police. Chinu was directed with his head bent over into the passenger seat at the back of the patrol car. The deputy entered the driver's side and sat in the seat. He kept a careful eye on Chinu. Another deputy entered and sat in the front passenger seat. Once they got the signal from Detective Dev, the car drove away. Detective Dev turned around to his deputies and gave them some orders. He also got into his car. Assistant Brenda joined him, and they drove off. Now the 2 cars were speeding with full sirens blaring to the police station. They took the bypass route to avoid general traffic. Inside the car, Brenda was entering notes into her laptop. Dev kept his eyes on the road. Brenda finished writing her notes in a few moments. Dev commented,
"This is why I like working with you, Brenda. You are always very organized, meticulous, and up to date with your work."
Brenda looked at Dev and smiled. She came back with a cheeky retort. "Well, I have to keep up with my senior." Dev smiled to himself. The car had reached the police headquarters by now. The vehicle which had brought Chinu had also just pulled up. They got him out of the transport vehicle and walked him into the building. The deputies brought Chinu to one of the interrogation rooms and sat him down on the chair. They released the handcuffs and left the room. A plastic glass filled with water was kept on the table. The room had another chair on the other side of the table. There was an inbuilt tape recorder which was fixed. The 2 corner cameras on the ceiling of the room were actively capturing the scene below. The deputies were waiting in the adjoining observation room. Their eyes were fixed on Chinu, who picked up the glass of water and drank it. He looked around the room and then at his knee. It was still bleeding, but only very slightly. He then leaned his head back on the chair and closed his eyes. The pain was bearable if he did not move it. Detective Dev was a good shot. He did not want the bullet to lodge in his knee. The bullet had just scraped his skin and probably got lodged somewhere in the wall of the casino. After some time, he heard the door open again and opened his eyes. 2 paramedics walked into the room to provide first aid to Chinu. They were handling him very gently, yet the pain in his knees was horrible. He smiled bitterly to himself.
You inflicted this on your own self.
But he also justified to himself.
What was I supposed to do, though?
Once the paramedics left, Detective Dev and Assistant Brenda walked into the room. A deputy brings an extra chair for Brenda. She had a notepad and pen in her hand. Dev switched on the tape recorder and did a sound check. He rewound the machine and listened to his own voice. He was satisfied that the tape recorder was functioning well. He then spoke into the microphone.
Date: 11/11/2017. Time: 19:30 hours. Detective Dev and Assistant Detective Brenda interrogating Mr. Chinu regarding the double murder of baby Aishwarya and Mrs. Nayagam.
The tape recorder remained turned on, and Dev looked up at Chinu.
Chinu, you are under arrest on suspicion of the double murder of baby Aishwarya and Mrs. Nayagam. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned on something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Dev continued after a pause.
Do you understand this?
Chinu replied,
Yes,
to the question. Dev added,
You also have the right to a lawyer who you can contact once we have processed your papers. Your entitlements are written on that laminated frame in the wall. Do you understand English?
Chinu nodded his head in affirmation. Dev said to him,
You can also see the police interview Code of Conduct, if you wish. Is it okay to proceed?
Chinu again replied,
Yes.
Dev asked him his country of birth. He added that they knew his local address. Chinu replied that he was from Chennai in India. Dev's next question was,
When did you emigrate to London?
Chinu softly said,
I completed my studies in IIT Chennai, and then came to London to work 3 years ago.
Dev asked Chinu if he had any friends or relatives.
Do you wish to let someone know that you were in the police station?
Chinu answered in the negative to both questions. Dev looked at his checklist on the interrogation form.
Do you have a lawyer?
Chinu said that he did not have one. Dev advised him that Chinu had the right to free counsel. There were 3 options. The first was his own lawyer, which he did not have. The second option was the duty solicitor who was present in the building, and the third option was legal advice.
Do you want to avail of any of the 2 suggestions?
Chinu replied,
Yes, I would like to avail of legal advice.
Dev informed him that Chinu will be processed now, and meanwhile they will organize a defense solicitor for him. Dev asked him,
Do you know what processing means?
Chinu, who had never been to a police station ever before in his life, had no clue. Dev supplied the meaning of processing.
One of the deputies will take your photographs and swab you for DNA evidence. Then you will be brought to a cell to wait for legal advice. Is that clear?
Chinu replied that he understood. Detective Dev now spoke into the tape recorder.
The interview is terminated, as the suspect has requested for legal advice. Time: 2000 hours. Date: 11/11/2017.
Dev indicated to Brenda, who got up from her chair and opened the door of the interrogation room. 2 deputies walked in, and Dev and Brenda walked out. The deputies helped Chinu up from the chair and brought him to the room of the custody officer. Here, he was stood against a wall and photographed from 3 angles: front, left, and right. Then, his mouth and the skin of his arms were swabbed. He was then brought to a custody suite. This suite was a temporary hold-up area for suspects and was furnished with a bed, pillow, and an overhead light. One of the deputies addressed Chinu and informed him that his dinner will be brought to him shortly. Then, they left the room and locked it behind them. They observed him from the outside for a short while. Chinu lay down in the bed, with his face covered with his hands. The deputies left the corridor after some time. Meanwhile, Assistant Brenda rang the defense solicitor call center. She came off the phone and informed Dev that the defense lawyer had spoken to Chinu on another line. The solicitor has given us an appointment for 10 a.m. in the morning. Dev shrugged his shoulders.
All right. Keep him safe and out of trouble. I will be back tomorrow morning.
He suggested to Brenda that she should leave as well, once the night staff come on duty. Brenda answered, "Good night, Detective Dev. I have some more paperwork to do. I will leave after that." Dev said goodnight and left, and he walked out the door. He got into his car and drove by the River Thames. It was late at night, but the traffic in London was very much alive and active. The taillights of the cars looked like the glowing red feet of a millipede in the darkness. All in a neat order, moving at the same time in a synchronized fashion in response to the traffic lights. He did not mind the busyness at this time of the night. The view of the Millennium Bridge and the London skyline gave him a sense of peace and serenity. He opened the window and the cool breeze enveloped him. It was a cold evening. He whistled softly to himself. He was happy with the day's work and is looking forward to the night ahead. The next morning, Dev drove to work and, as usual, prepared his first mug of brew. He liked it strong and sweet. He sighed with satisfaction and sat down at his table to begin his work. After some time, Assistant Detective Brenda knocked at the door. She popped her head inside the door and wished him good morning. "It is 9:30. Do you want to go for breakfast before the defense solicitor arrives?" Dev looked at the time and rolled his eyes up to the heavens.
We might as well. Where does the time go?
Dev asked her if she knew the name of the solicitor who was coming in the morning. "His name is Solicitor John Knoll. I have never worked with him before. Hope he is a sensible person," Brenda answered. They both walked in to the local deli. There, they ordered a coffee and a bowl of porridge each and sat down in the lounge. They ate their breakfast in peace and got up to go. The defense lawyer was already waiting in the visiting room. Detective Dev welcomed him and escorted him into the interview room. Brenda walked over to the general office and instructed the deputies to bring Chinu to the interview room. Solicitor John Knoll was seated on a chair behind the table in the interview room. Chinu walked in. On seeing him come in the door, John stood up and extended his hand to Chinu.
Hello, Chinu. My name is John Knoll. I am a solicitor from the Defense Solicitor Call Center. I spoke to you last night over the phone. Please, take a seat. Are you happy to proceed?
Chinu shook John's hand and sat down on the chair across from him. John continued,
I will be your legal advice for the case. just to make you aware that you can also pay for an independent legal advice other than myself. Do you want to do that?
Chinu said that he didn't want to do so. John rubbed his hands together to counteract the cold in the room.
All right then. Chinu, let me begin by advising you that, during the interrogation, if you are unsure, look at me before answering the question from the police officers. If I nod, then you give the answer, and if I stay quiet, then don't answer the question. Is that understood?
Chinu nodded his head in response. John further added,
I have briefed myself with your file, but I want to hear your version. Please tell me your side of the story.